The lecture hall at Zenith Academy held about 300 students that morning. Most of them were sprawled across floating seats, half paying attention as Professor Vector pulled up the Daily Archive selection on the massive holographic display. The professor was old even by Croft standards. His gray scales had faded to almost white, and he moved with the careful deliberation of someone who had seen too much combat. When the display refused to open Section 7, confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. Torque, a massive Vrexian who took up 2 seats, leaned forward with interest. His crimson scales caught the light as he raised one clawed hand. "Professor, what's the issue?" "The system is blocking the Human War archives." Several students around him snickered. Humans were still relatively new to the galactic community. Everyone knew they had joined only about 50 cycles ago, which was basically yesterday in galactic terms. The idea that their military records would be restricted seemed ridiculous. "The files are sealed under the Human Conflict Protocol," Professor Vector said flatly. He didn't meet anyone's eyes as he started pulling up alternative material. "Wait, what?" Torque's voice carried across the hall. "Why would human records be sealed? Are they that embarrassing?" His study partner Lyra, whose crystalline body refracted light into rainbow patterns, let out a musical laugh. Maybe they lost every battle they ever fought? That would be mortifying enough to hide. More laughter spread through the room. Even some of the more serious students cracked smiles. "I heard they only survived pre-space era by pure luck." Someone called out from the middle rows. "Probably got saved by the Council fleet, and don't want anyone to know." Professor Vector's 3 eyes darkened to nearly black. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "The Human Conflict Protocol exists for good reason. We will not be accessing those files." Torque wasn't backing down. He stood up, his full height making other students crane their necks to see him. "With respect, Professor, that sounds like censorship. We've studied the Vrexian Berserker charges where our ancestors killed everything in sight. We've analyzed the Croft Hive purges that wiped out entire planetary populations. We even covered the Quellan mine raids last semester, and those were genuinely disturbing. Why are human records off limits?" Several students nodded in agreement. Miho, a brilliant Theshan diplomat student, activated his recording device. "This seems like a legitimate academic freedom issue. How can we properly study comparative military doctrine if one species gets special protection?" In the back row, far from the main debate, Gina sat perfectly still. She was one of only 5 human students at Zenith Academy, and right now she wished she was anywhere else. Her hands were clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest. "Drop it," she whispered, though she knew Torque was too far away to hear her. "Please, just drop it." But Torque was on a roll now, energized by the support of his classmates. "You know what this looks like, right? It looks like humans get special treatment because they're new, like they're too fragile to have their history examined. Every species in this room has had their darkest moments put under academic scrutiny. Why not them?" "Yeah," someone else shouted. "Either humans are part of the galactic community or they're not. They don't get to hide their past." Sujin, another human student sitting near Gina, quietly closed her datapad and started packing her things. She caught Gina's eye and gave her a meaningful look. Gina understood. They both knew what was coming. Professor Vector raised one scaled hand, calling for silence. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made the students actually listen. "I served in the Galactic Defense Force for 200 cycles. I fought in 14 major conflicts across 40 systems. I have seen horrors that would break most of your minds." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room. "The human records are sealed because the Galactic Council, in a rare unanimous decision, determined that unrestricted access would be psychologically damaging to students." The hall fell silent for a moment. Then someone laughed. "Come on, Professor. You're saying humans are scarier than Vrexian Berserkers." Torque grinned, his confidence returning. "This is getting ridiculous. They're humans. Most of them barely reach my shoulder. They have no natural weapons, no armor plating, no psionic abilities. What could they possibly have done that's worse than what we've already studied?" He turned to look directly at Gina. "Hey, human, why don't you tell us?" Afraid? We'll see your people running away from real warriors. Every eye in the lecture hall turned to the back row. Gina felt her jaw tighten. She forced herself to look up and meet Torque's amused gaze. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, but in the sudden silence, everyone heard her clearly. I'm not afraid you'll see us running away. She swallowed hard. I'm afraid you'll see the opposite. Torque blinked confused. What's that supposed to mean? Gina stood up slowly, gathering her belongings. Sujin was already at the door. It means you should listen to Professor and drop this. Some things are restricted for your protection, not ours. She walked toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the quiet hall. As she passed Professor Vector, the Old Croft veteran gave her a slight nod. There was something in his 3 eyes. Respect, maybe, or pity. Behind her, Torque's voice rang out again. See? They can't even defend their own history. I'm filing a formal petition with the Academy Council. Within 48 hours, Torque's petition had exploded across campus. It started with just his combat doctrine class, maybe 30 students who thought the restriction was unfair. But then it hit the campus network, and suddenly everyone had an opinion. By the 3rd day, over 300 students had signed. The petition document kept popping up on everyone's personal displays. Impossible to ignore. Arguments broke out in hallways, common rooms, and dining facilities. Some students called it a matter of academic freedom. Others insisted it was about treating humans as equal members of the galactic community. A small group even claimed it was anti-human discrimination to keep the record sealed. The campus news feeds ran constant debates. A Quellan philosophy student argued that all historical truth must be accessible, no matter how uncomfortable. A Croft military historian countered that some information required proper context and maturity. Nobody seemed to be listening to anyone else. Everyone just wanted to be heard. Gina tried to avoid it all. She took her meals early or late, hoping to miss the crowds. She studied in her dormitory instead of the library. But the campus wasn't that big, and eventually, conversations found her anyway. It happened in the cafeteria on the 4th day. Gina was sitting alone in a corner, trying to focus on her meal. The food here never quite satisfied her human taste buds, but she'd learned to tolerate it. She was pushing some kind of protein cube around her plate when Nari slid into the seat across from her. Nari was a Theshan, all elegant movements and diplomatic grace. She'd always been friendly to Gina, one of the few aliens who seemed genuinely interested in human culture rather than just curious about the strange newcomers. "Hey," Nari said, her voice warm and encouraging. "I just wanted you to know that I signed the petition. A lot of us did. Your people should be proud. Once everyone sees your military history, it'll prove that Earth deserves just as much respect as any other world." Gina set down her fork carefully. She didn't look up. "Nari, please. You need to tell Torque to withdraw the petition." "What? Why would we do that?" Nari leaned forward, confused. "This is important. You're being treated like you need protection, like you're not real members of the community. That's not fair." "It's not about fair." Gina's voice was quiet but steady. "Just drop it, please." "I don't understand. What are you afraid of?" Nari's confusion was genuine. She really thought she was helping. Are the records really that bad? Even if humans lost some battles, that's nothing to be ashamed of. Every species has defeats in their history. Gina finally looked up. Her eyes were tired, like she hadn't been sleeping well. "I'm not afraid of what you'll learn about us. I'm afraid of what you'll learn about yourselves, about how you'd react if you were in our position." Nari sat back, frowning. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. Something in Gina's expression made her pause, but after a moment, she shook her head. "I think you're overthinking this. It's just history. We've all studied terrible things. We can handle it." She left the table, still convinced she was doing the right thing. Gina watched her go and felt a heavy weight settle in her stomach. She knew what was coming. They all did, all 5 human students on campus. They'd been through the orientation. They knew what the rest of the galaxy was about to learn. The Academy Council meeting lasted 3 hours. 12 council members representing different species debated behind closed doors. Some argued the petition was reasonable. Others warned about the consequences. In the end, they reached a compromise that satisfied no one, but seemed necessary. The announcement came that evening. One supervised viewing session would be permitted. Medical staff would be present. Psychological counselors would be on standby. Students would be warned about the content. Attendance would be voluntary, and anyone could leave at any time without penalty. Torque read the announcement in his dormitory and let out a triumphant roar. His roommate Do-Hyen glanced up from his desk, where he was studying for an upcoming exam. Finally, Torque was practically bouncing with excitement. This is perfect. We'll finally prove that humans are just another species. No more special treatment. No more mysterious restrictions. Do-Hyen closed his textbook and stood up. He walked to his closet and pulled out a travel bag. "What are you doing?" Torque asked, his celebration pausing. "Packing," Do-Hyen said simply. He started folding clothes and placing them carefully in the bag. "Going somewhere?" "Home. Taking a week off." Do-Hyen's movements were methodical, practiced. He'd clearly been planning this. Torque laughed. "Come on, it's not that big a deal. Why are you leaving?" Do-Hyen paused, a shirt halfway into his bag. He looked at his roommate, this massive Vrexian warrior who thought he understood the universe. "Because I don't want to be on campus when you all realize." "Realize what?" Do-Hyen zipped up his bag. "You'll see. I just don't want to be here when it happens. It's going to change things, Torque. The way people look at us. The way you look at me." He headed for the door. "You're being dramatic," Torque called after him. Do-Hyen stopped at the doorway. "Maybe, or maybe I just know my own history better than you do." He left without another word. Torque stood alone in their room. His earlier excitement dampened slightly, but he shook it off. Humans were always overdramatic about everything. This was going to be fine. It was just history. The viewing was scheduled for 3 days later. The viewing room was massive, designed to hold 200 students comfortably. Torque arrived early and claimed a seat in the middle section where he'd have a perfect view of the main screen. All around him, students filed in with varying degrees of curiosity and excitement. Some carried snacks. Others chatted casually about their other classes. What struck Torque as strange were the counselor stations. 6 of them, positioned along the walls, each staffed by a professional psychological counselor. Medical personnel stood near the exits. There were even portable medical beds folded up in the corners. For historical viewing, it seemed like absurd overkill. Lyra settled into the seat next to him, her crystalline form refracting the overhead lights. "They're treating this like we're about to watch something traumatic. It's just old battle footage." "Probably standard procedure," Torque said, though he didn't quite believe it himself. "Legal requirements or something." Nari found a seat a few rows ahead. Her elegant Theshan features composed and ready. She brought a recording device to take notes. Around them, the room continued to fill. 200 students, representing a dozen different species, all eager to finally see what the fuss was about. Professor Vector entered last. The Old Croft veteran moved slowly to the front of the room. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there looking at the crowd. His 3 eyes seemed sad somehow. "Before we begin," he finally said, "I want to remind everyone that you may leave at any time. No questions asked. No penalties. The counselors are here if you need them." He paused. "I strongly suggest you make use of them if you feel overwhelmed." Some students exchanged confused glances. Others rolled their eyes. Torque heard someone behind him mutter, "This is ridiculous." The lights dimmed. The massive screen at the front flickered to life. Text appeared first, stark white letters against a black background. Torque read them aloud under his breath. Proxima Refuge. Cycle 2247. Human colony population, 1,247,891. More text appeared below. Exathery swarm approaching. 12 billion units. The room went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Lyra leaned forward, her voice confused. "Wait, the Exathery? I thought humans never encountered them." We studied the swarm last year. They vanished from this sector of space decades before humans even left their home system. Professor Vector's voice came from the darkness. This is historical footage from before the swarm was neutralized. Every student in that room knew about the HFY. They were legendary, the stuff of nightmares that parents used to scare children into behaving. A hive species that moved through space like locusts, consuming everything in their path. They'd nearly destroyed the galaxy before mysteriously withdrawing from all explored space. Entire species had been wiped out before the swarm finally stopped. The screen shifted to show orbital scans. The HFY fleet appeared as a massive, writhing cloud of bioships. Millions upon millions of individual units moving as one organism. The scale was incomprehensible. It looked like a dark stain spreading across space itself. "Look at those numbers," Torque whispered, unable to believe what he was seeing. 12 billion against 1 million. The humans should evacuate immediately. They need to get everyone off that planet right now. But the footage showed something else entirely. Ground-level cameras captured the colony's main spaceport. Ships were launching, yes, but not nearly enough. Not for a full evacuation. Nari's voice carried from her seat. Why aren't there more evacuation ships? They should have hundreds in the air by now. The screen changed again. This time it showed what appeared to be a command center. A woman in a military uniform stood at the front of a room filled with civilians and soldiers. Her name appeared on screen, Commander Minjay. She looked young, maybe in her 30s by human standards. Her face was calm, composed. Too calm for someone facing certain death. "Attention all residents of Proxima Refuge." Her voice came through clearly. As of this moment, all evacuation transports have been redirected to carry children under the age of 10 only. Priority boarding for infants and toddlers. Parents, you have 2 hours to say goodbye to your kids. Shocked murmurs rippled through the viewing room. Torque felt his scales prickle with confusion. Commander Minjay continued. "Everyone else, you know the drill. We practice this. Factory workers begin immediate conversion to ammunition production. All recreational facilities are now medical stations. Agricultural zones become fallback defensive positions. We hold them at the walls." The camera zoomed in on her face. Her expression hadn't changed. She might have been discussing dinner plans. "We're not running," she said simply. "We're making them pay for every meter of ground. If they want Proxima, they'll have to take it from our cold, dead hands. And even then, they won't get much use out of it. Defensive Protocol 7 is now active." Nari stood up from her seat, her voice shaking. "They're staying? They're going to fight that." She pointed at the screen, which now showed the approaching swarm again. 12 billion hostile units against barely 1 million humans. That's not a battle. That's suicide. Professor Vector didn't respond. He just stood in the darkness, watching the screen. In the back row, near one of the exits, Gina had been sitting perfectly still since the footage started. Her face was pale. Her hands gripped the armrest of her chair so tightly that her knuckles were white. She stood up quietly and walked toward the exit. Her footsteps were soft, barely audible over the confused discussions breaking out among the students. No one noticed her leave. They were all too focused on the screen, trying to understand what they were seeing. The door closed behind her with a soft click. The hallway outside was empty and quiet. Gina leaned against the wall and tried to control her breathing. Inside, the footage continued to play. The battle footage started clinical and distant. Overhead satellite views showed the human defense batteries firing into the approaching HFY swarm. Bright flashes of light against the darkness of space. Numbers scrolling on the side of the screen tracked enemy casualties. 10,000, 20,000, 50,000. It seemed almost sterile at first, like watching a video game rather than actual combat. Then the HFY reached the planet's surface. The swarm descended like a living nightmare, blackening the sky until you couldn't see the sun anymore. Just writhing masses of insect-like creatures, each the size of a transport vehicle, moving with singular purpose. The camera angle shifted. Now it was ground level, showing the colony's outer defensive walls. Human soldiers manned massive artillery pieces, firing nonstop into the approaching horde. The sound was deafening even through the recording. At least they had proper defenses, Torque muttered, trying to find something positive in what he was seeing. But then the footage changed again. This time it came from a helmet camera. The name displayed on screen read Sergeant Hyun, 3rd Defense Battalion. The camera bounced with his movements as he ran through what looked like a residential street. What they saw next made the entire viewing room go silent. Elderly humans stood at windows, holding weapons. Teenagers, maybe 15 or 16 years old, crouched behind makeshift barricades. A woman who couldn't have been older than 60 was calmly loading ammunition belts. Next to her, a man with gray hair checked the charge on some kind of energy weapon. These weren't soldiers. They were civilians, grandparents, students, office workers, parents, and none of them were panicking. None of them were crying or screaming or trying to run. They just stood there, weapons ready, waiting for the swarm to reach them. Position check. Hyun's voice came through the recording. His breathing was steady. Sector 4 ready, someone responded. Sector 5 ready. Sector 6 ready. One by one, entire districts full of civilians reported their readiness to fight and die. Lyra's crystalline body had stopped refracting light. She sat frozen, unable to process what she was seeing. They're all staying, every single one of them. The XA theory hit the outer wall like a tsunami. The defense batteries carved holes in their ranks. But there were just too many. They swarmed over the wall like water, flooding into the colony streets. The helmet camera showed Sergeant Hyun firing into the mass. Beside him, an elderly woman did the same. She showed no fear, just grim determination. Sector 7 is lost. A voice crackled over the communication system. Initiating Protocol Atlas. A student near the front whispered, "What's Protocol Atlas?" They got their answer immediately. On screen, the entire Sector 7 district erupted in a blinding flash of white light. The camera automatically dimmed to protect viewers' eyes, but they could still see it. A fusion explosion that turned several city blocks into a miniature sun. The tactical display on the corner of the screen updated. Human casualties, 14,000. XA theory casualties, 107,000. They bombed their own people. Lyra breathed, her voice barely audible. Her crystalline form flickered with shock. There were humans still fighting in that sector. They just killed their own soldiers. Nobody responded. They couldn't. They were all staring at the screen in horror. But the footage continued, and it only got worse. The camera followed human forces as they fought building to building, street by street. But something was wrong. Every time the humans retreated, the XA theory that followed them died in massive explosions. Every building was rigged. Every street was a trap. Every fallback position was designed to kill as many of the swarm as possible. The humans weren't fighting to win ground. They were fighting to make every meter cost the enemy thousands of lives. A new camera feed appeared. This one showed a medical facility. The name on screen read Field Medic Sora, Emergency Medical Corps. She looked young, probably in her early 20s. Blood streaked her face and uniform. Behind her, the medical facility was full of wounded humans. People missing limbs. People with horrific injuries. People who clearly couldn't be moved. Sora was setting up a camera, deliberately recording a message. Her hands were steady despite the blood. To whoever finds this recording, she said in Galactic Common, speaking slowly so the translation would be clear. To whoever wins this war, I want you to understand something. This is how you stop them. This is how you fight a swarm that outnumbers you. She paused, looking directly into the camera. Behind her, explosions shook the building. The swarm was getting closer. You make every meter cost them millions. Every building, every street, every single room. You don't give them anything for free. You don't let them take ground without bleeding for it. She turned slightly, gesturing to the wounded behind her. These people can't be evacuated. They're too injured to move, and we're not leaving them to be consumed by those things. Sora reached down and armed something off-screen. The medical facility's self-destruct system. A timer appeared in the corner. 5 minutes. We don't surrender ground, she said quietly. We erase it. We make sure that even when we lose, they lose more. That's what it means to fight humans. We don't know how to quit. We only know how to make you wish you'd never started. She turned back to her patients and resumed treating them, bandaging wounds, administering pain medication, holding hands, offering comfort. The timer kept counting down. The camera feed ended before it reached 0. The viewing room erupted. 3 students ran for the exits, hands over their mouths. One of them didn't make it and was sick right there in the aisle. 2 others were crying openly. A Vrexian warrior student, someone from Torque's own species known for their fierce battle culture, sat with his head in his hands, scales pale with shock. The counselors moved through the room, offering support to students who were clearly overwhelmed. But the footage still wasn't over. The viewing room had fallen into an eerie silence. Half the students who started watching were gone now, either physically sick or unable to process what they were seeing. Those who remained sat frozen, unable to look away from the screen, even though every instinct told them to leave. The footage had been running for nearly 2 hours. 2 hours of watching a colony die in the most deliberate, calculated way imaginable. Every explosion was planned. Every sacrifice was intentional. The humans weren't losing. They were spending themselves like currency, buying enemy casualties with their own lives. Then the final log entry appeared on screen. Text only. No more video footage. Just cold, clinical numbers that made everything so much worse. Proxima Refuge. Final status. Human casualties. 1,247,891. That number sat there in harsh white text. 100%. Every single human on that colony was dead. Not most of them. Not the majority. Every single one. Exatherry casualties. 847 million. Strategic assessment. Complete success. Torque read those numbers 3 times before his brain could process them. Over 800 million exatherry dead. For a colony of barely over 1 million humans. That was a kill ratio of almost 700 to 1. Complete success, he whispered. They called it complete success. But there was one more transmission. The final moments of Commander Minje appeared on screen. She was alone now in the command center. The walls around her showed cracks and scorch marks. You could hear the exatherry burrowing through the structure itself, getting closer. The sound was like nails on metal, amplified 1,000 times. Commander Minje sat calmly at her console. She cleaned the blood off her face at some point. Her uniform was torn and burnt, but she straightened it as best she could. She looked directly into the camera and switched to Galactic Common, speaking clearly. By the time anyone translates this message, Proxima will be gone. Every human here will be dead. But that's okay. We knew what we signed up for when we built a colony this far from Earth. She paused, checking something on her console. The sounds of burrowing were getting louder, closer. The exatherry came here thinking we'd be easy prey. 1 million humans versus 12 billion of them. Those are good odds if you're a swarm species that doesn't care about individual losses. Her smile was cold. Not cruel, just absolutely certain. But they just learned something important. Humans don't have a word for surrender in our military vocabulary. We removed it centuries ago. What we do have is 23 different words for how much we'll make you pay. 23 variations on the same theme. If you want what's ours, you'll bleed for every centimeter of it. The camera shook as something massive hit the building. Dust fell from the ceiling. Proxima cost them 847 million units. Think about that number. That's enough casualties to conquer a dozen other species. That's enough losses to take 50 undefended worlds. But we made them spend it all here, on this one colony, just to kill us. Her hand moved to a button on the console. A big red button that looked exactly like what it was. The final detonator. To whoever finds this, we're not the exception. This is what every human colony will do if you threaten them. This is what Earth itself would do if you reached our home system. We will make the cost so high that victory becomes meaningless. She pressed the button without hesitation. The screen went white. then black, then nothing. Professor Vector moved slowly to the front of the room and turned on the lights. The brightness felt wrong somehow, too normal after what they'd just witnessed. Nearly half the seats were empty now. Students had fled throughout the viewing, unable to handle what they were seeing. Those who remained looked like they'd aged years in a single afternoon. Torque's crimson scales had gone pale, almost pink. His hands were shaking. This wasn't even the worst example. Professor Vector said quietly. His 3 eyes surveyed the remaining students. This was the footage we deemed appropriate for academic viewing. There were 2 other human colonies that faced the Exathery. The results were similar. After the 3rd colony, the swarm completely withdrew from human space. They chose to abandon their invasion entirely despite outnumbering humans 10,000 to 1. Why? Someone asked. Their voice cracked. They could have won. Eventually. Because the Exathery did the mathematics, the professor replied. At the rate humans were willing to die, it would cost the swarm their entire species to conquer all of human space. They chose survival over victory. Torque stared at the blank screen. His voice was barely a whisper. They chose to die. All of them. Every single person on that colony. They just chose death to make it expensive. No. Everyone turned. Gina stood in the doorway. She'd come back at some point, though nobody had noticed. Tears streamed down her face, but her voice was steady. They didn't choose death, she said, walking slowly into the room. They chose to make sure it would never happen again. Not any other colony. Not to anyone's children. That's what total human doctrine means. If we can't save our own people, we'll make absolutely certain you can't threaten anyone else. Ever. Nari turned in her seat, her elegant Thessian features twisted with horror. Gina, if something like that happened now, would you? Yes. Gina didn't hesitate. Any of us would. Every human you've ever met. We all would. That's why the files are sealed. Not to protect our reputation. To protect you from understanding what we're capable of. Because humanity's greatest strength isn't that we're fierce warriors. She looked around the room at all the shocked faces staring at her. It's that we're absolutely certain about what we're willing to lose. And that certainty is terrifying. Professor Vector nodded slowly. The Galactic Council keeps humanity in peace because humanity in war doesn't fight for victory. You fight for extinction. Either yours or your enemies. There's no middle ground. The galaxy didn't make peace with Earth because we defeated you. We made peace because we realized we can survive you. Torque stood up on shaking legs. I withdraw my petition. Wise decision, the professor said softly. Some knowledge can't be unlearned. Now you all understand why humans smile when they talk about peace. It's not weakness. It's not naivety. It's mercy. When humans choose peace, they're choosing not to do what you just watched. That smile isn't being kind. The viewing room emptied in complete silence. No one spoke. No one made eye contact. Students walked like ghosts through the corridors. The footage was never mentioned again in casual conversation. Students who'd been there didn't talk about it. They couldn't find the words. But something changed on campus. Human students were no longer questioned or dismissed. When they spoke about peace, about cooperation, about finding diplomatic solutions, other species listened with new understanding, and enrollment in human cultural exchange programs tripled that semester, because now everyone knew. The humans walking among them, smiling and friendly and kind, carried that same certainty inside them, that same willingness to pay any price. They just chose every day not to.